right into it? Okay. So what we're going to focus on is the history of music from Bach to the Consoler and looking at the spirituality of the great composers. Do we have a little remote?
It's not working.
Not working. Okay, so we'll come over here. No problem. So we look in the book called Spiritism and Art, which has not yet been translated to English, but is a whole book where Léon Denis, a collaborator with Allan Kardec, assembles several communications by spirit composers, where he focuses on how art influences the evolution of the planet, materially speaking, as well as how music functions in the spirit world. And this is a communication here where we have the, all right, it's fine, where he says, music is the voice of the deep heavens. On earth, it is through written or spoken thought that faith is communicated and man are instructed. However, in the spirit realms, our guides tell us music is the sublime expression of divine thought. So we also learn that, thank you. Bravo. Thank you. So we notice that when we are in the spirit state, we don't have our physical bodies. So we are able to perceive and to feel completely in our whole beings. And we see that in a lot of people that have near-death experiences. When they come back, overwhelmingly all of them report that when they were hearing music in the spirit world, wherever they went, but it wasn't like they were listening through their ears. It was like they were feeling in their whole body. The same thing when they were seeing things or smelling things. They weren't seeing through these two eyes. They could see 360 degrees. So that's what they tell us, that because music in the spirit world can be perceived solely by our spirit, it's much more powerful, and it is the way that sublime thought is communicated over there. We look in the Spirits book, the question number 251, where Kardec asks the spirits, are spirits sensitive to music? This is the answer that the spirits give. Do you mean your music? What is that kind of music when compared to celestial music? That harmony of which no one on earth can have an idea. One is to the other what the primitive chant is when compared to a soft melody. Nevertheless, ordinary spirits may take certain pleasure in listening to your music, because they are not yet able to appreciate anything more sublime. For spirits, music has infinite charm due to their highly developed sensitive qualities. Of course, I am referring to celestial music, which is everything the spiritual imagination can conceive of as the most beautiful and delicate of all. So you see a clear distinction here between earthly music, which can be as primitive as just drum beats, to a full orchestral symphony by composers, which is divinely inspired, right? There's a huge difference over there. And so here we can see how we as incarnate beings have a very limited access to understanding music. But we are still spirits. And that's the point of this lecture here. It's not because we are incarnate in a body that we are not able to fully feel and experience the music. We are able to do that. We just need to get into the right mindset to concentrate and to put ourselves in a state of meditation. And when we are surrounded by nourishing, healing vibrations like this in the Spiritist Center, we can really excel. And it doesn't have to be just the Spiritist Center. It can be any place where there is positive intentions of devotion, where we hear in churches and temples and so on. Okay, over here. So we're talking about mediumship a lot here, and we know that we are all mediums, right? This is an attribute that we all have. The same is true for music. We all have the ability to experience music and to express music. Mediumship is a neutral faculty, right? We can take our mediumship and we can do good things with it, or we can do bad things with it. Music is the same thing. We have the sense of harmony as part of our spirit. Just like we have hearing, we have listening, we have sight, we have the sense of harmony. And we have these mediums, which we can call them, that not only were intellectually very prepared with the tools to be able to translate in the most complex sense the harmonies that they could hear, But a lot of them were very much morally inclined. And so they were able to unite their intellectual sense with their moral sense and their devotion, depending on where they were and what life they led, to be able to translate the harmonies that we hear about the celestial music, which the spirits say in question 251, right? These composers, all of them, tell you stories that they composed better when they had just woken up. Or they had a dream that they went to some place and they heard this divine melody. They could not even understand how it felt. The minute they woke up, they rushed to the desk so that they can put it down on paper. And all of them express frustration that what they wrote ultimately is nowhere near compared to what they felt and what they experienced when they were sleeping. All of the composers report these kinds of things. In addition, we see many composers with examples of mediumship that are very ostensive examples of mediumship. And we're going to examine those later on in our lecture. But just so we can have an idea here, we have up there George Friedrich Handel, Jules Massenet, the French composer, who actually is very helpful in the book Spiritism in Art. Léon Denis receives a lot of communications from that spirit about the music in the spirit world. Antonio Vivaldi, Franz Schubert, Ludwig van Beethoven, Peter Tchaikovsky, Mozart, and Bach. These are just some of the composers. Of course, we're not going to go into all of them because we don't have time. We'll just have a general idea. Because this lecture is talking about spirituality and music, I'm going to focus on those composers and their specific works that really were filled with divine inspiration and spirituality. This is Handel, who composed the famous Messiah. You recognize this piece, right? Handel composed this so that it was a benefit concert. And with the money that he raised, he was able to take a lot of people out of prison. Debtors' prisons. Back in the day, if you had a lot of debt, you would be in jail. If that was still the case today, I think half the population would be behind bars, myself included. So thank God it doesn't happen anymore. But it's very interesting, the compositional process, because Handel stayed locked inside his bedroom for a week. And his servant would bring him food every day. And at the end of the day, he would go and pick up the tray, and Handel had barely touched the food. And he started getting worried. But he was obeying his orders from Handel, where he said, "Do not disturb me." So after a week, the servant became preoccupied. So he knocked and he opened the door. And he saw Handel looking up, and his face was completely bathed in tears. He was crying. He said, "I just came back from heaven, and I saw thousands of angels, and I saw the face of God," and this is what they were singing. The Hallelujah chorus of the Messiah, which is a declaration, basically, in music, that Jesus Christ is the promised Messiah that we see in the Old Testament. So that shows you that not only was he eating very little, we know that when people start to fast, their physical bodies tend to get a little more disconnected and their spirits tend to leave more of their bodies. And so maybe he was doing that on purpose, he didn't know, but he was being more and more connected to it. And he literally had an out-of-body experience as he was composing this and could hear the music from the spirit world, and he brought it to us in this work. Now, Johann Sebastian Bach, I like to say that in the history of religions, Jesus Christ was the most powerful example and person that was able to change religion in the most profound sense. So much so that we have before Christ and after Christ. I like to compare Bach to that in the history of music. There really is a before Bach and after Bach. After Bach, the history of music completely changed. It was never going to be the same. And it's still a contemporary music that speaks so profoundly to our hearts. And it goes to show you that if you work hard, you're able to do anything. Bach raised 20 children. He had many jobs at the same time so that he could support his family. He was a teacher and organist. He was required by his employers to compose an entire mass every week. And he composed so much music that after he died, it took the Bach Society in Leipzig 46 years to compile all of his manuscripts and be able to assemble it so that people could know in the future. And believe it or not, he only had 5 of his works published when he was alive. All of the other works, we came to know after Bach died. He was a devout Christian of the Lutheran movement, which at his time was already in Germany in full force for about 150 years. And Luther himself used to say that music is second only to the Gospels. So Bach was a very devout Christian. Every time he was going to start a new composition, he wrote, "Jesus, help me," or "In the name of Jesus," at the top of the manuscript. And every time he would end the composition, he would put, "To the glory of God alone." We see the deep meditation that is present in his music. And in one of the few pieces that he was able to publish and became famous in his life is the St. Matthew Passion, which we're going to see right now. These are just some things that he said about music and about God. The aim and final end of all music should be none other than the glory of God and the refreshment of the soul. Where there is devotional music, God is always at hand with his gracious presence. Music is an agreeable harmony for the honor and God and the permissible delights of the soul. Já fazer a Jesus, a alegria dos homens. Isso, ainda não. So one of the pieces that he's very famous for, já está no volume alto, is Jesus' Joy of Man's Desiring. And his idea to write this music was for us to feel in the movement and in the rhythm of the music how light the yoke of Christ is for us, how light it can be the burden. So in that perpetual motion of moving forward, that's what he wanted for us to feel. And I wanted to play for you, and we can hear what the chorus is singing over here. Now, the idea for this lecture is not for us to have an intellectual insight and be leave here with more intelligence, but it's more to feel the music. And go with what Leon Denis is saying. Let our spirits really connect with the harmonies of the music so we can really feel it, not necessarily think anything about it. So this is what we're going to hear that the chorus is going to sing, Jesus, Joy of Man's Desiring. And feel free to close your eyes or feel free to sing along, whatever you want. Sing along, yeah. Tá muito baixo. Thank you. Que calor. Woo. I got a hot flash. Sorry about that. Okay, next slide. So that should prepare us for one of Bach's most famous masterpieces, the St. Matthew Passion. So Bach took chapters 26 and 27 of the Gospel of Matthew and he put it to music. And it's a very powerful experience because it is the two chapters that relate the passion of the Christ when he was crucified, basically. And although the work is 3.5 hours long, of course we're not going to be able to hear everything, I chose that we can take just 15 minutes of it and experience a little bit of it. This was composed in 1727, and it was at a time that the purpose was really for people to go into church and meditate on the experience of Christ and really meditate on his sacrifices and leave inspired, right? Now, nowadays, this is the 21st century, we have the ability of really making this into a fully orchestrated experience, and this is what we're going to see. This is a DVD of the Berlin Philharmonic in a production that they did last year, where they don't just perform the music with the orchestra and chorus, but they make it come alive by turning it into sort of a play. They call it a semi-dramatized version. So we were actually speaking earlier about the disciples, about James and Peter, and how all of them were imperfect men, but were moved by the message and were really courageous at the end of the day, that it was only 12 disciples in a very far removed time with no technology that were responsible for sustaining the message of the gospel and making it available to us all the way to today, 2,000 plus years later. And a big moment of chapters 26 and 27 of Matthew is when Peter denies Christ. And Bach makes it very powerful in the music. He uses a device that's called word painting, where it's literally you take a word and instead of painting it with a brush, you paint it with music. And the way he does it is in a very powerful, descriptive way. So we'll see here the moment where they have just finished the Last Supper, and they are singing hymns, and they're going up to the Mount of Olives together. And Jesus turns to the disciples and say, you know, truly I tell you that I'm going to disappoint a lot of you. Why does he say that? It's because he knows that his crucifixion is about to happen, and he's not going to fight it. They're going to accuse him, they're going to mistreat him, they're going to do all kinds of horrible things to him. And the disciples are going to be enraged because they're going to see that Christ is not going to react at all. So Peter says, well, no, Christ, whatever you do, Master, I will never be angry with you. And Jesus says, well, in truth I tell you that before the cock crows this morning, you will deny me 3 times. So we'll switch to the second DVD to actually see the moment where Christ is denied by Peter 3 times when Jesus is taken to the holy tribunal of the Pharisees. And Peter is so scared because he's a human being like all of us. That's the beautiful thing about this piece of music and for us to meditate upon. The disciples were regular people just like you and me, but they were moved by an extraordinary experience in their lives that made them do extraordinary feats, which we are all able to do here through our faith, through our hard work. So Bach portrays that in this music very well. So we're going to see the moment where they're going up to the Mount of Olives, where Jesus tells them they're going to be disappointed at him. He tells Peter that you're going to deny me 3 times. Then we'll switch to the DVD and see the actual moment when that happens. So you'll see the chorus plays the function of the followers of Jesus, and they're supposed to echo what they are feeling and what they want to express. I want to follow you, Jesus. And at the same time, Bach makes the chorus also play the role of those that are attacking Jesus, that want to crucify him. So there is this interaction there. And what the chorus is singing is not what's in the Gospels. These are ornaments and additional texts that Bach added himself to enrich the experience. what we're going to see now is the actual denial of Christ by Peter 3 times. And what happens next is probably one of the most moving and beautiful pieces of music that Bach ever composed, which is the moment where a woman sings to God, asking God to forgive, to have pity on Peter's conscience. Because what happens is the moment that Peter realizes that he has just denied Christ 3 times out of fear, he's overcome with so much regret. His conscience alerts him about what he just did, and he remembers the words of Christ, that he starts crying uncontrollably. And Bach is able to express that in the music so powerfully. And I think at the time it was meant to really put the people there. Imagine 18th century Germany, you know, it wasn't a very easy life. But you would go there and you really would leave refreshed in your soul. And also have a sense of responsibility, you know, for what we as humans sort of let happen to Christ. So that's basically what we're going to see. And it's the violin is representing Peter in his crying and his regret, while the woman singing is representing the plea for God. Please forgive this man. Please have pity on him. So questions? Feedback?
Beautiful. Beautifully shot. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Beautifully shot.
It's a profoundly moving spiritual experience when you have 3 hours to spare to watch the whole thing from beginning to end. Is very contemplative. It really soothes and calms you down. And when we see the opening slide that showed that music in the spirit world is how the divine thought is communicated, you can really see how Bach was able to grasp that divine thought in the spirit world and communicate it in the material world through his music. And that's what we're going to see in other composers now. There's another element here we're going to see that we just saw in this piece of music, we're going to see in the next piece of music, and also in the last one, is the presence, the prominence of the female energy, of the female intercession, or the mother figure to save us. You know, we saw this, that Bach chose a woman to ask for Christ, for God to intercede on behalf of Peter. And we're going to see now a piece of music that you'll definitely recognize that is universally attributed to motherhood and was also inspired by the composers, and I'm dropping everything. And in the last piece of music, we're going to see that too, the feminine saving humanity, right? So the next composer, or medium at this point, that we are going to examine is Franz Schubert, who had a very short life of only 31 years. But still very productive, was such an avid composer that he even created a new style of music in Germany called the German Lied, or the songs. He composed over 600 of them. And if you are not very familiar with his music, but you listen to one, you'll be able to always pinpoint, because he has a very particular style. A lot of these composers led very tough lives, full of suffering, full of difficulties. And Schubert's case is probably one of the most extreme. He lived in dire poverty for his entire life. He relied on the generosity of his friends to give him manuscript paper so he could write music on. He couldn't even afford manuscript paper. Many times he went to bed hungry. And he was a very outgoing, extroverted, friendly guy. And it was actually what put food in his stomach. The ability for him to captivate other people, because those people became his friends and those generous souls that would actually help him out. And in many times, Schubert traded a plate of food for a song. And one of those actually turned out to be the Ave Maria. So we see how compelling a composer or a person is put in life circumstances. I think sometimes it was helpful for them to face so many difficulties in their life so that they could go inside themselves and try to escape their reality and try to express what they were suffering through music. And that's when the creative energy was able to connect with the inspiration from above and all these composers were able to compose like that. And he's also another example of mediumship, where many times he said, I feel like I don't belong in any way to this world. And although he died at a very young age, he had a very mature spirituality, very devout Christian, very spiritual, universalist type of Christianity. So the Ave Maria doesn't have to be introduced with a lot of explanation. It speaks for itself. But there is lyrics that are attached to the actual music. So what I thought I would do here today is I would play the music and we would see what the lyrics are that Schubert wrote, what they're saying. He wrote them in German, and they were later translated to Latin, and I put the English language version here. So the same invitation for you to feel the music as a spirit, which we all are, not through necessarily just our physical ears, but really let your spirit feel the penetration of the sounds. And if you'd like to give comments afterwards, we'll have a little bit of time for that. Né? Ok, não vamos fazer isso porque não vai dar tempo. All right. I was going to do more composers, but I'd rather we cut it short and have more conversation later than rush through things. So what we noticed was that we had a history from around the 1600s, 1700s with Bach. And we know in history that the 19th century is that moment in human history where the arrival of the Comforter, or as we call it here, the Consoler, was supposed to happen in the revelations of the New Testament. And in this passage here in the same book by Léon Denis, Spiritism and Art, he talks about how the arrival of this Comforter and the third revelation in the world is going to make an impact in art and music. And so he says, however, as a new ideal awakens and spots of spiritualism light up in all corners of the globe, we will see the hatching and development of a more powerful reflex in people's souls towards the wonders of invisible life, as revealed by our spirit friends. And this will be the sign of a blooming of new works, the starting point of an artistic era that will surpass in richness and grandeur the work of previous centuries. And we see in the 19th century, like in no other century, the incarnation of so many composers at the same time, all over Europe. And their music, their works were filled with what was known as the Romantic style. Now, Romantic style, the name says it, is the most full of feeling, of emotion that connects with people's souls. And that's what was happening at the time. So we see one of the most powerful examples of that is a composer of the name Gustav Mahler. Who has heard of Gustav Mahler? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. He's not a very well-known composer. But I would say that of all the composers in the 19th century, the one that was able to capture the teachings that the spirits were giving to mediums all over the world, including those mediums that worked with Kardec, he was able to capture the essence of their teachings, the best, and to translate them into music. Mahler was a deeply spiritual man. This is one of his famous quotes, which shows his own personal convictions. We will all return. Our life only has sense if it is shot through with this certainty, and it is wholly unimportant whether in a later reincarnation we recall an earlier one. What counts is not the individual and his memory, but only the spirit's great movement towards perfection, that purification which progresses with each reincarnation. That is why I have to live ethically, to spare myself a part of the road when it returns. Wonderful, right? His awareness of reincarnation and his ideas about the fact that it doesn't matter that if you don't remember what your previous life was. What matters is the spirit's great movement towards perfection and purification. And music has that power. We see in Kardec's books, the posthumous works, the spirit of Rossini, explaining that the music has the power to dematerialize us. Think about that. As Teilhard de Chardin says, we're not humans in a spiritual experience. We're spirits in a human experience. We come here to spiritualize matter, but we can't let matter materialize our spirits. So one of the devices that we can rely on is divinely inspired music to dematerialize us, to awaken our souls, to really deepen our senses so we can really reconnect with our essence and our emotions. And by the way, that's just not in classical music. That's in all styles of music where you see the presence of divinity in the lyrics, sometimes in a beautiful melody. You can see that in all styles of music. There is a touch of spirituality there. And when there is that presence, I guarantee you every time those pieces of music, they endure through many, many years, decades, sometimes centuries. We're going to see an example of Mahler's music here that I think is truly one of the best examples of the entire repertoire. But before we get there, I'm going to show you a little house that he had built for himself in the interior part of Austria, where he would retire every summer and spend 3 or 4 months there composing. Mahler was one of those mediums that had the ostensive mediumship similar to what we see with Chico Xavier. He mentioned to his wife many times when he would leave this little house, he would go to have lunch with her when he was on a break, and he would say, I can't understand how the notes find their way onto the page. It's like an intangible force takes over me. And during these times, I don't belong to myself. These are his words. And he could not be disturbed in this little house. Sometimes he would stay hours, sometimes days there, but he could not have any disturbances. And he didn't even have a piano there. All he had was a desk, paper, and pencil. And he would go sometimes into feverish modes of composing, which is very much like what a trance mediumship is, or automatic writing is, very similar to that. He also said this, I don't choose what to compose. It chooses me. And there's a very powerful example of that. Mahler's mediumship is so astonishing that he composed a series of songs called Songs on the Death of Children. And his wife was infuriated by that. He said, what is wrong with you? Well, are you trying to tempt destiny with this kind of music? And he said, I can't control it. It's not me. And one of the songs talks about, you know, a person not going into the storm and not getting a cold from it. Well, it turns out a few years later that his daughter dies. And at that moment in his life is when Mahler is overcome with so much grief. And all of his symphonies are journeys, individual, very specific journeys. He composed 10 symphonies, and they are gargantuan, massive works that last over an hour each. And every single work is a different journey into spiritual questions. For instance, his first symphony talks about the hero's journey from the pits of hell to heaven and overcoming all of the obstacles in life to get there. His third symphony, which some of you had a chance to see in New Jersey when we went a few years ago, shows the evolution of the vital principle from the mineral to the animal to the human form, and then in the human it awakens, and as it awakens it starts having free will. And as it has free will, it goes into conflicts. And so we have a song of a woman singing, lamenting the deep pain that man experiences. And after that, it goes into the angels and how the angels live. And finally, the symphony ends with the love of God. And I recommend, if you like what you're going to hear today, and when you go home, we have the beauty of the technology today of the internet. You go to YouTube and put Mahler Symphony No. 3 and put the last movement, which is the love of God. No words describe how moving that piece is. There's another symphony of his which is a child's view of the spirit world. So it's full of innocence and purity. And he really is able to capture how a little child with its purity would experience the spirit realm. And on and on. What we're going to see today is his second symphony called The Resurrection. So Mahler was very persecuted in his life for being Jewish in the end of the 19th century in Austria, where anti-Semitism was very much on the rise. So he had that to deal with, discrimination and prejudice all over he went. He had to deal with the death of his daughter. He had to deal with the fact that he was fired from his jobs because of being Jewish. So there's a lot of things happening in his life. His wife was being unfaithful to him. And so Mahler had sort of a crisis, and that's what prompted him to start writing the Second Symphony, where he starts asking questions. Why do we have to live? Why do we suffer? Why do we have to love? Why do we die? All of these existential questions he started asking. And he came up with a plan to answer them in the composition of the Second Symphony. As you can see, it took the summer of 1888 all the way to 1895, every summer, for him to finish. because it's a piece of music that lasts over an hour and 20 minutes. The score is like almost 300 pages. And imagine, at the time, it was by hand. There were no computers to assist him. And it's a whole journey examining the end of days. Mahler was fascinated with Christ, with the Gospels, with the New Testament, with Buddhist philosophies, with Nietzsche and Schopenhauer, and he had his own spiritual convictions. And when he read the New Testament about the end of days, about Judgment Day, he had a different interpretation of his own, where he felt that we would all arrive on that day and be overcome by the love of God, no matter what we did, no matter how we behaved. It was all going to be this overwhelming universal love that was going to embrace each and every one of us. Now imagine for a second, in the 19th century materialistic society of Europe, imagine going into a concert hall of the elite and being given by what's happening on the stage the most insightful revelations about spiritual life, which we're going to see here. This symphony that we're going to watch talks about the evolution of us going from man to angels, which is a concept that was very new. It came through Spiritism and through the works of Kardec. Before, people had the idea that angels were separate from creation. No. We as man today, through our own effort and hard work, are going to sow our own wings. Wings of intellect, wings of morality. And with it, we're going to soar and become angels ourselves with our own effort. He puts that idea in the music. The idea of the law of destruction, the law of reincarnation, transmigration of souls. Now, in 1895, in December of 1895, when this piece was premiered in Berlin, Mahler's sister was in the audience, and she wrote in her diary that night. And she said, I have never seen this. People that didn't know one another were getting up at the end and hugging each other and crying. This is Germany in the 19th century. People didn't do that in conventional society, but they were so overcome with how sublime and powerful the message was that it completely shook the foundations. Not only is this music deeply spiritual, it's also deeply innovative. It calls for over 150 musicians on the stage, much larger than any symphony had ever been attempted at the time. It calls for a chorus. Not only that, it asks for musicians to be placed off stage. Why? Because Mahler wanted to show the interaction between the spirit realm, off stage, and the physical world, on stage. He wanted to show the dimensions where the angels and God reside, off stage, with where we are physically. So he creates that interaction like that. And I don't know how they used to do it back then. Today, all the conductors have cameras, and there's a monitor in backstage that they're able to synchronize it. But back in the day, they had to have 4 or 5 people signaling back there in order just to be able to put that together. In Mahler's view, the end of days and Judgment Day was going to happen because of the destruction of the planet through a meteor. And so the moment we see here in the beginning of this DVD is the society at its greatest glories and triumphs. And then suddenly there's something in the air when they start feeling the oncoming presence of something from outside that's going to destroy. So you'll see that interaction on stage where the violins represent people's anxieties that something's going to happen, finally the panic, and the actual destruction. When that happens, everyone disincarnates together and arrives in the spirit world. At that moment, you hear these sublime melodies, which I am sure Mahler heard them in his dream, or he was inspired by spirits there who were assisting him in his work. And what happens next is a clarification, because in his mind he felt some spirits would arrive in the spirit world ready to continue on, while others would be agitated and nervous and not knowing where they were. That's when Mahler relies on 2 female spirits to explain and gently soothe and get them to guide them and understand where they are. And at that end is when he introduces these ideas that are very spiritual and very much like what we see in Kardec's work. And what basically at the end answers all of the questions that he was asking. Why do we live? Why do we suffer? What happens after we die? Where does everything go? What's the reason for it? Why was I born? Etc., etc., etc. The end result is literally an experience where we feel transported into another sphere. And so, because we're here connecting spiritism and spirituality with music, is a moment where I invite you all to really take a deep breath and sit back and relax and really let the music penetrate your spirit. And also, let's remember that what's happening here, just like what's going to happen on stage in this DVD, that Mahler had the idea of having two dimensions, off stage for spirit world and on stage for the world. This is also happening here. We're seeing the material physical plane here. But there's also a work happening in the spirit plane. And we can also, if we want, choose to get into a state of giving energies and donating fluids and hoping that whoever of our brothers and sisters in the vicinity are around and may be inspired, may be touched by the beauty of the music, may they also feel it and also be assisted by it. So I invite you all to sit back, and this will be the conclusion of the lecture. So if you want to go to a prayer right afterwards, we can just do that. While Adilson is preparing, we have a little issue with the video. The quality of the image is a little distorted with the colors, but we felt that this was preferable because the sound system from the DVD player is much better. And so since this is music, we're going to prioritize the sound quality over the video quality. You're going to see the Simón Bolívar Youth Orchestra of Venezuela performing here on the occasion of the 30th anniversary of their music education program, which is the largest music education program in the world. There's over 400,000 children and teenagers all over Venezuela singing and playing in orchestras. It's a social program. And on the 30th anniversary of the program, they invited the conductor Simon Rattle from the Berlin Philharmonic to conduct Mahler's symphony because it's called the Resurrection. It was supposed to symbolize a rebirth in their country. So that's what we're going to watch right now. Tem que... Já tá ligado? Mas e o menu? Não, o menu. Como é que faz para pôr no menu? Top menu. Aha. So the chorus represents the angels and the spirit guides that will assist humanity. As soon as humanity dies and arrives in the spirit world, the angels represent those people. Deixa eu pegar minha cadeira por aqui.